and keep our citizens safe by keeping foreign terrorists out of our country. I'd like to clarify that the most recent executive order does what it does and does not mean. This is not a travel ban. This is a temporary pause that allows us to better review the existing refugee and visa vetting system. Over the next 30 days, we will analyze and assess the strengths and the weaknesses of our current immigration system, which is the most generous in the world. We will then provide our foreign partners with 60 days to cooperate with our national security requirements. This way we can ensure the system is doing what it is designed to do, which is protect the American people. This analysis is long overdue and strongly supported by the Department's career intelligence officials. Acting Under Secretary for DHS Intelligence and Analysis, David Glawe, will speak to that in more detail shortly. Furthermore, this is not, I repeat, not a ban on Muslims. The Homeland Security mission is to safeguard the American people, our homeland, our values, and religious liberty is one of our most fundamental and treasured values. It's important to understand that there are terrorists and other bad actors who are seeking to infiltrate our homeland every single day. The 7 countries named in the executive order are those designated by Congress and the Obama administration as requiring additional security when making decisions about who comes into our homeland. As my predecessor, Secretary Johnson, liked to say, it is easier to play defense on the 50-yard line than it is on the 1-yard line. By preventing terrorists from entering our country, we can stop terror attacks from striking the homeland. We cannot gamble with American lives. I will not gamble with American lives. These orders are a matter of national security. It is my sworn responsibility as the Secretary of Homeland Security to protect and defend the American people. And I have directed departmental leadership to implement the President's executive orders professionally, humanely, and in accordance with the law. Since the court orders related to the executive order were issued over the weekend, CBP immediately began taking steps, that's Customs and Border Protection, immediately began taking steps to be in compliance. We are and will remain in compliance with judicial orders. We have also been working with our partners at the Departments of Defense, Justice, and State. We are committed to ensuring that all individuals affected by the EOs, including those affected by the court orders, are being provided all rights afforded under our laws. We are and will continue to enforce President Trump's executive orders humanely and with professionalism. Our job is to protect the homeland. These executive orders help do that. I'm happy to have my colleagues answer any questions, clarify any positions that may be confusing. And we have with us today Acting Commissioner of CVP, Acting Commissioner of ICE, and my intelligence, or the Department's intelligence chief. So with that.
Good afternoon, Kevin McAleenan, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. I'm here to talk about the implementation of the executive order. Upon receipt of the executive order, CBP took immediate actions to implement the key provisions, calling for suspending entry for 90 days to non-immigrant visa holders and immigrant visa holders from the 7 affected countries. We routinely make changes in our systems and our policies for immigration entry at our border, and we acted quickly on Friday evening to make the changes with this executive order. First, we made changes in our system to identify those passport holders and visa holders from the affected countries. We had a call with our field leadership, our directors of field operations, to inform them of the executive order and the actions they needed to take. We issued written guidance to our field, and we had calls with stakeholders. These are air carriers and airports, starting just a few hours after receiving the order, so that they would understand how to operate. We also, overnight on Friday and Saturday, worked through a process to be able to waive travelers that were in transit or had sensitive cases that should be considered for a waiver in the national interest, as the executive order calls for. To put this in context, in the first 72 hours of the order, 1 million travelers came through our borders by air. Out of those travelers, 500,000 of them were foreign nationals. The people affected by this order, we denied boarding to 721 travelers that had visas from the affected countries, but we actually processed for waivers 1,060 lawful permanent residents of the United States, as well as an additional 75 waivers granted to immigrant visa and non-immigrant visa holders. To make sure everyone understands how the process is working today, lawful permanent residents and special immigrant visa holders are allowed to board their flights foreign and will be processed for a waiver upon arrival. Again, we've done that over 1,000 times so far in this 3 days of the implementation. Secondly, immigrant visa holders and non-immigrant visa holders that are covered, they'll be denied boarding before they board their aircraft, and they'll be referred to the Department of State for further process. Another question that has come up is whether dual nationals are treated differently. Travelers will be assessed at our border based on the passport they present, not any dual national status. So if you're a citizen of the United Kingdom, you present your United Kingdom passport, and the executive order does not apply to you upon arrival. I also want to talk a little bit about refugees. The executive order calls for refugees that were ready to travel where it would cause undue hardship, that they should be considered for waivers. We have done that in concert with our Department of State colleagues. 872 refugees will be arriving this week, and we'll be processing them for waivers through the end of the week, and that's fully coordinated. As Secretary Kelly noted, we are responding immediately to any court orders. We did so quickly on Friday night with the Eastern District of New York order, and those parties that were affected by that order were processed for a waiver and admitted into the United States. Lastly, I just want to tell you that to increase communications and provide additional information to travelers, we are updating on our website. It'll be there as you log in at cbp.gov. A statement about the implementation, FAQs giving information to travelers, the public, and other stakeholders, as well as a link for specific questions affecting individual travelers and a phone number to call. All of that will be on our website. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Thomas Homan. I'm the Acting Director for ICE. I can tell you it was a great honor to be contacted in the last couple of days and asked to step up in this capacity as an Acting Director. My plans to retire were put on hold, and I did so because I chose to serve my country once again. For those who don't know me, I've been in the immigration enforcement business for 33 years. I started on the front lines in the U.S. Border Patrol. Now I was with the Office of Investigations, Homeland Security Investigations for over 20 years and climbed the ranks there. Now I'm on enforcement removal operations and on the back end, arresting, detaining, removing aliens. So I certainly know the immigration life cycle and how to enforce immigration laws. I chose to come back and act in this capacity because of my concern for the communities and the safety of our communities. You know, folks, there's jurisdictions across the country where aliens are arrested, criminal aliens convicted of serious crimes that walk out of these jurisdictions without any cooperation with ICE. So they're back in the communities, back in our communities. And that causes my officers to once again go out in the community, knock on a door to arrest somebody they should have arrested in a county jail. So I'm here to execute a mission within a framework provided me. That framework has changed on the executive orders of President Trump. And the men and women of ICE will execute them perfectly, and we're here to serve as an organization. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Dave Glawe. I'm the Acting Undersecretary for Intelligence. I just want to echo Secretary Kelly's remarks. The national security of the United States is the utmost priority. This is the fundamental responsibility of our government to protect the national homeland from nefarious actors trying to come inbound in the United States. What this is an action for us to take a temporary pause and take a look at how we collect intelligence and how we run that against databases to identify those nefarious actors. I'm taking a look how law enforcement, the intelligence community, the Department of Defense, our federal, state, local law enforcement organizations share information and how we run those data against, not just against refugee populations, but anyone trying to come inbound into the United States to identify these sophisticated networks that are potentially trying to come inbound. We're trying to break down those barriers to share information, to continue our automated screening processes and vetting process, to make sure that we, once again, to identify those nefarious actors, nefarious networks that are outside of the United States that may be potentially trying to threaten the United States. So again, this is a pause to take a look at how we collect data and how we exploit it against national security threats. Thank you.
We have some time for a couple questions. 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, come on up. Probably best to be in front of the microphone, so who's first?
Julia. Great, thanks.
Hi.
Julia Ainsley with Reuters. 2 quick questions. First, to the acting ICE director, is ICE planning on growing detention space for people detained at the southwest border and extending the time in which they are held? And then also on CBP, you mentioned that you spoke to people about the order within 72 hours. Would it have been easier if you had any guidance before this order came out? Could confusion have been avoided?
On the first question, yes. We got to secure our borders. So those arrested entering the United States, we need to detain those people. So we're in the process of identifying additional detention capacity. As far as increasing the length of stay, we like to do just the opposite. We like to keep them in custody as little as possible, make sure they get the due process, and once they get that order from a judge, execute that order.
Kevin, before you step up, let me kind of frame it a little bit. We did know the EO was coming. We had people involved in the general drafting of it. Clearly, it was this whole approach was part of what then candidate Trump talked about for a year or two. So we knew all that was coming. As I said, we had high-level government lawyers from across the interagency, to include Homeland Security, that were involved in the drafting of it. So we knew it was coming. It wasn't a surprise it was coming. And then we implemented it. So go ahead, Kevin.
Right. Our job at the operational level is to take guidance, whether it's statute, whether it's executive order or direction from the secretary, or in some cases emerging threat, and respond as quickly and effectively as possible. So we go through that process, the system changes we need, the communication to the field, communication with stakeholders. In this case, we had court orders come in right when we were implementing the operational plan, so we had to adjust our efforts a little bit. But we worked quickly to implement, and I think the process is really smoothed out. And just to clarify, the initial comms weren't within 72 hours or within 2 hours of the executive order being received.
Reporter with Congressional Quarterly, Gopal Ratnam. 2 questions, whoever wants to take this. There are several lawmakers and advocacy groups that are saying that some Border Patrol agents ignored court orders and handcuffed passengers and tried to deport some of them. Are you looking into these reports, and can you reassure people that in fact agents are following these orders? And the second question, the President has called the executive order an extreme vetting. Can you explain what exactly is involved in extreme vetting, which is over and beyond what already is happening?
Yeah, the first thing I'd say without question, no member of the Homeland Security team ignored a court order, nor would they ignore a court order. I've heard these reports. I've asked people to include members of Congress who called me about them and asked them if they could run down some information for me. And of course, we don't have any information, but we would not ignore a court order. Okay, the second, and I'll let you come up, Kevin.
What exactly is involved in?
Yeah, extreme vetting, we're looking at various options right now. We, the interagency, but led by, of course, Homeland Security. The countries, there are many countries, 7 that we're dealing with right now, that we have, in our view, in my view, don't have the kind of law enforcement, records keeping, that kind of thing that can convince us that one of their citizens is indeed who that citizen says they are and what their background might be. So there's various additional things we're considering. On the other end, when someone comes in and asks for consideration to get a visa, it might be certainly an accounting of what websites they visit. It might be telephone contact information so that we can see who they're talking to. But again, all of this is under development. But those are the kind of things we're looking at. Social media, we have to be convinced that people that come here, there's a reasonable expectation that we don't know who they are and what they're coming here for and what their backgrounds are. And right now there are a number of countries on the planet that don't have that kind of records keeping, police work, that kind of thing. And the 7 in question right now, for the most part, fall into that category. So we are developing what additional vetting, extreme vetting, might look like, and we will certainly work with countries on this. Kevin, do you want to?
I'll just add to the Secretary's comments. Specifically, we had a legal team as part of our operational action team in place Friday night. As soon as the court order was received and they advised us on the implications, we put a complete hold on anyone being removed in connection with the executive order. We then process those folks for waivers and release them in the United States.
Kelly.
I'm sorry, right here.
Paula Reed, CBS News. Two questions. The first one's just to clarify what you said, that you knew the executive order was coming. Is that what you said? You knew it was going to be signed on Friday? Because there have been some reports the first time you found out about it was when you were on your plane and you were upset about it. But you knew it was coming?
As I said, we knew it was coming from like 2 years ago when Mr. Trump first started to run for president. Certainly didn't learn about it on an airplane. I mean, again, knew it was coming, knew it was signed Friday morning. I took a trip down to Miami for a couple of different reasons, one of which was to visit the people on the front lines of this whole effort, and that is the folks at the Miami Airport, TSA, Border Patrol, those kind of people. Had some time. You know, as you probably all know, I came from, before I retired, 39 months in Southern Command, went there and talked to Admiral Kurt Tidd, engaged with him about the partnership that frankly is very strong between Homeland Security and Southcom. In fact, I'm very proud to say that that developed very closely between myself when I was in command and my very, very good friend Jay Johnson, and we want to continue that. But no, I didn't learn about it on an airplane.
How much guidance were you able to give them specifically when it comes to green card holders or people who had visas as a result of their work with the U.S. military? Because it seems like a lot of the problems that were encountered could have been easily foreseeable.
I think from our perspective, again, people like me are expected, and not just because of my military background. The departments are the implementers of the policy, obviously developed, by the White House, approved by the president, in collaboration, and then sent down to the departments for execution. In this case, Homeland Security. The EO to me, and again, it was more or less a collaborative process. The EO to me was fairly clear. Now, again, when that came down, I think I was in my 6th day on the job, but I relied on people like the ones that are standing up here in the hundreds back at the headquarters to say, okay, we got it, boss. We know this looks good to us, and we're off to the races. Really, I kept being asked about chaos at the ports of entry. And as I said to many members of Congress in individual phone calls, our officers who were at the counters, so to speak, the only chaos they saw was what was taking place in other parts of the airport. They knew what they were doing as immigrants, or not immigrants, but foreign nationals presented themselves. They know what to do. They knew what to do with it. And as I say, the only, I guess, we had to step back and recock a little bit. Kevin can address that. He already has. We had to step back and recock just a little bit based on the court order that we immediately implemented. No, I knew this was under development, and I think we were in pretty good shape in how it was implemented by the workforce.
Okay, we'll go here, then Evan.
Yes. Elise Foley of the Huffington Post. The White House has said repeatedly that 109 people were inconvenienced by this. The number that you gave for getting waivers, like 10 times that. Can you explain the discrepancy there between 109 and then the number of people that you just gave who were not let on planes, eventually given waivers?
Yeah, you can take it, Kevin. I think the 109 certainly was, I'm recollecting a phone call. Now, the 109, I think, was very early on, right? I mean, it was the first day of the thing that evening. And, of course, over time, that number would increase. But go ahead, Kevin, if you have anything else.
Just to follow up, though, can you explain why the White House didn't have a current number? They were saying 109 yesterday.
Yeah. As Kevin will probably outline to you, the records keeping we do is not always, it's based on yesterday. So Kevin, Acting Commissioner, can give you some very good numbers yesterday. But in order to get the numbers today, we have to wait till tomorrow. It's just the way they collect the information. Actually, obviously it's an ongoing period of comings and goings, so that's why they do it that way. Kevin, I don't know if you have.
The Secretary is absolutely correct. I understand the White House was referring to the initial hours and the folks that were in transit to the U.S. when the executive order came about. That was a much smaller number that were affected who had landed in the U.S. and were being addressed, and some of them were subject to that court order. So I think that's the difference in the numbers. We're going to keep updating the numbers on our website so you have the accurate current information as of a validated number from roughly about 20 hours before every time we post.
Secretary Kelly, Pierre Thomas, ABC News. Did Homeland Security have a specific operational plan in place prior to the executive order being signed? And then secondarily, when did you learn specifically that President Trump was signing the order?
Well, I guess I'd go back to, I knew he was going to sign an order about 1.5 years or 2 years before he became the president-elect. From day one in terms of the inauguration, finishing touches, I would have to put it that way, were being put on the executive order. As I say, the high-level folks in the government, attorneys as well, were part of that. People on my staff were generally involved. I guess probably Wednesday, I think we learned, Tuesday, Wednesday, that it would probably be during the week that it would be signed out. As you could imagine, copies go back and forth, and they're tweaked right up to the last minute, or adjusted right up to the last minute. I think probably Thursday we found out it was going to be signed the next day. Certainly, if you really, if you really want to know what was in the executive order, just read the newspaper the day before, and you'd find out. But so it was done in that way, and of course, Kevin and his team, the whole team, knows it's coming. Knows what certainly the president-elect and knows what direction the EO is, the draft EO was outlining. So people like Kevin, I don't know nearly as much about this as he does in terms of how you actually execute right down at the counter level at the airports, but he was leaning forward on that. So when it was signed, we executed. And the only, as Kevin I think you'd agree, the only adjustment that had to be made was when the court order came out, and of course we reacted to that as fast as we could.
Yeah, would you explain a little bit about the impression of confusion? We heard from some of the airlines that they felt they were getting contradictory guidance, especially with regard to whether or not people, the legal permanent residents, were allowed to even board aircraft, and where they would be get this secondary screening that people started talking about. Perhaps you could explain a little bit about that level of confusion and why that developed.
Let's take it, yeah.
So under the executive order, Section 3, there's a provision for granting of waivers when it's in the national interest. So lawful permanent residents are technically covered in the executive order as immigrant visa holders. We worked quickly with counsel to devise a waiver process. The Secretary has given guidance that a returning resident, their status as an LPR in the U.S. is dispositive that it's in the national interest to welcome them home. So once we got that guidance, we were able to delegate the authority to grant a waiver out to the field, and we were able to clarify with the carriers that these folks were allowed to board.
And that didn't happen, though, immediately, right? That happened by Sunday?
It unfolded over a matter of hours, Friday night into Saturday afternoon. That's correct.
To Secretary Kelly, and I guess Kevin, I'm a little bit confused, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but you talked about 1.5 years, 2 years ago. We published it, the AP published it several days in advance, or details of the draft. That doesn't preclude you not knowing what was in it. Did you know the details of what was in the order outside of sort of open source media? Who exactly in the Department of Homeland Security was involved? If you can't provide names, is that the landing team from the transition from the Trump administration prior to its arrival, or was it career staff involved from the Department of Homeland Security prior to this announcement?
I did know it was under development. Had an opportunity to look at least 2, as I recollect, drafts as it got closer to Friday. Again, don't exactly know, other than some of the my legal shop representatives were involved. I would imagine on the landing team, I would imagine some of them. But the point is, it came to the department. It was, on a close hold basis, meaning we didn't distribute it to everyone in the department, only those people that needed it, myself included, my chief. and the lawyers, and so it was a back and forth process. I did talk to representing the White House, probably certainly early in the week, about where it was going, how it was being developed. I'd commented that I'd seen some of the initial drafts. Pretty busy week. I didn't get involved in correcting grammar or reformatting the thing. So I don't know if that answers it.
Were the drafts that you saw from the White House, or were they from the media, from the Associated Press? Or
no, they weren't from the media. They were from, although I'll give you credit, you had it. But no, they were just the drafts that were coming back and forth within the interagency.
Mr. Secretary, a clarification, please. Deborah Pettit with NBC. You had no personal input or any sort of advance working with making these drafts? In other words, the draft was made, it was presented to you, and then you signed it.
Well, presented to me, I mean, this is primarily a staff process, right? So the policy gurus in the White House are working with the interagency people. Not a large number, I wouldn't expect, of interagency people. I saw the draft because it's still in staffing, and the people that worked in and around me were saying, "We got it, boss. You know, this is kind of what we expected it to be." I did not look at it from the perspective of, as I say, correcting the grammar or saying, "No, we need to change these words or do this thing." People that know the immigration process infinitely better than I do right now, were people, and that includes people around the interagency, were the ones that did the staff work, and ultimately the president signed it. Then, as you know, in our government, then that is now passed down to the relevant agency, in this case Homeland Security, and we execute it. And as Kevin has indicated, and I certainly would endorse, the people on the front lines, Border Protection, in this particular case CBP, did an absolutely outstanding job. And I think, again, more credit is due because they flexed very quickly when the court order came out. And throughout all of this, the people that were inconvenienced for some period of time as they were entering our country were treated in the way they're always treated, with, you know, dignity and respect. So.
Okay, we have two more questions content related to the executive order itself and not the timing only, please. Here.
Yeah, two for Secretary Kelly.
Actually, Molly needs to get one question. Go ahead.
Secretary Kelly, you said that no CBP officials violated court orders. The previous court order that came out Saturday night required that lawyers at Dulles Airport have access to people held up there. There were people held up when that order came down for at least 24 hours after she released that order. Every single lawyer I talked to there said they did not have access to folks who were held up at the airport. I'd love your view on why you don't consider that a violation of the court order. And then second,
do you have details?
Kevin, there have been numerous reports that people who were held up at airports were given copies of Form 1 or I-407, a form that basically eliminates your legal residency. Is that correct? Were CBP officials directed to give copies of that form to people they encountered at airports? And if not, are there going to be any repercussions for CBP officials who did give copies of that form to people who were held up at airports?
That's about 6 questions, but I'll let Kevin go ahead and handle it.
So very quickly, the Eastern District of Virginia order applied to LPRs that were in process at Dulles, and as soon as we got it, we developed a process to give access to counsel for those that were being processed at Dulles. That's offered to every lawful permanent resident that's coming through, and it was input immediately. It didn't apply to everyone who was being processed for a waiver to lawful permanent residents. That's first.
What is that process?
Excuse me?
How did that process work?
We make sure that the arriving permanent residents have a list of legal counsel. Again, at this point, we're processing for a waiver expeditiously, and they're being released. So we're not aware of anyone who's taken up the opportunity to call counsel from inside the Federal Inspection Service area. They're departing and welcomed home. But in terms of the form issue, we'll look into that. There were some issues with expedited removal that was canceled by the court order, and we quickly moved to change the status in the system and correct it. So if there are any issues with individuals, I've given the information on cbp.gov. We're happy to look into it. We're happy to work with Immigration Counsel. We've briefed the American Association of Immigration Lawyers on the process, and we're happy to work through it to make any corrections to status.
Just to be clear, and I ask you this, Kevin, to the best of our knowledge, no CBP officer knowingly, intentionally violated the court order.
That's correct.
Okay.
Thank you. Last question, Molly.
Senator Rubio and other members of Congress yesterday had said that their staff were told that they had been instructed by the White House not to provide information about the executive order. I was wondering if you could respond to those allegations. In addition, during your testimony, during your confirmation, you said you had not had conversations. It was not your understanding that President Trump would be placing any additional limits on Muslim travelers. So I'm wondering when that may have changed. Last question: if there was an operational plan in place, why was it that a legal process was then developed subsequently after the fact, and green card holders were turned away, SIVs were turned away, and what's going to be done for the people that has already happened to? Do you have a plan in place to get them?
Do you want to do this last one first?
That second part, there were SIVs denied boarding in the immediate hours after. There were carriers that overinterpreted our guidance. They're responding. We have great partnerships. They responded to the security aspect, and then we had to work with them to rebook travelers. We've taken steps contacting a relative in the U.S. to find someone who was already denied boarding foreign so that we can tell them that they'll be allowed to board. We've worked very hard to correct and clarify any of those issues.
As of yesterday, the Department of Defense didn't know that SIVs were permitted under this guidance. They were compiling a list so that they could make requests for SIVs to be let in the country. Why didn't the department, if this guidance was clear and it was just a few cases in which people overinterpreted the guidance, the airlines, why didn't the Department of Defense know as of yesterday that SIVs were allowed to the extent to which they were compiling a list?
I think it's fair to acknowledge that communications, publicly and interagency, haven't been the best in the initial rollout of this process. We have communicated with the Department of State now. Again, these guidelines will be on our website, and we're working with state and the carriers to make sure these folks know the rules and that we will allow them to board and process them for a waiver upon arrival.
And Molly, can you say again the first thing about the Senator's office?
So Senator Rubio said yesterday that his office had been told by the Department of State, I believe, and I believe also by the Department of Homeland Security, that they weren't allowed to provide information about the executive order to members of Congress, that they've been instructed by the White House not to do so.
That people in Homeland Security, and Defense were instructed by the White House not to talk to Congress?
Not to provide information to Congress about
I don't know anything about that.
And then the last question I had,
yep.
I realized I
one more, go ahead.
During your testimony, during your confirmation process, you said you had not had conversations with, at the time, President-elect Trump, and did not have the understanding that increased limits would be placed on Muslim travelers. Can you comment on that now, given what's happened?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's happened now, obviously, is that the EO has outlined 7 countries for various reasons as to why travelers from those countries will be prevented from traveling to the United States until we can satisfy ourselves that, that the people that they are who they say they are, and that their backgrounds are such that we could trust that they're coming here for the right reasons as opposed to nefarious reasons. And this is a process by which we will, over the next 30, 60, 90, 120 days, ideally work with those countries. And as I say, we're also looking at other countries perhaps that we could help or suggest that they tighten up on their procedures. But I will say this, I mean, the vast majority of the 1.7 billion Muslims that live on this planet, the vast majority of them have, all other things being equal, have access to the United States. And a relatively small number right now are being held up for a period of time until we can take a look at what their procedures are. I'd be less than honest if I told you that some of those countries that are currently on the list may not be taken off the list anytime soon. They're countries that are in various states of collapse.